Hello everyone, welcome to another Bible study and episode review in Shady Oak Ministries. I'm of course Shady Oak, and today we're going to be discussing the season finale of My Little Pony, Friendship is Magic, Season 8. The episodes, known as School Raze, in alignment, in contrast with the opening episode, School Days. We're going to be discussing, once again, the nature of Satan and contrasting him, hopefully and effectively, with Jesus, and let you guys know the options that are available to you as far as who in this world we serve. 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 13 through 15 may be a familiar one if you've been with these studies for any length of time, but for those of you who are new, allow me to explain what's happening here. My purpose in these studies isn't to make the accusation, which, by the way, is the name of Satan, accuser, to make a bold-faced claim against somebody, isn't to make the accusation that the authors, writers, producers of My Little Pony are necessarily pushing a Christian message. However, this being a show that has a worthwhile message, I, as a Christian, am going to observe it from a Christian worldview. And since I acknowledge and recognize personally from my views that there has been one story worth telling, the Creator reaching out to his creation and seeking a restored relationship with him, that's the lens I've chosen to interpret this show. And without any shortage of evidence to confirm that hypothesis, I found something good and a reason why I enjoy this show. And I want to share it with you and give you not only a reason to enjoy this show if you are a Christian, but also perhaps as a non-Christian, give us some common ground to discuss these things on more familiar terms. So, clarifying this topic with the nature of evil, Satan, the enemy, and all these other things that plenty of Hollywood movies have tried to distort and even, with the best of intentions, even properly represent over time, I felt that this episode did us a lot of justice in seeing just how we truly defeat evil. Because when you say those words, it's definitely something that everyone would want to be a part of. And yet, unfortunately, throughout history, in every single endeavor to eliminate evil from this world, and we've discussed this before as well, we somehow end up getting caught up in it and being a part of it. I mean, it's a noble pursuit to want a genetically pure human species and not have to worry about certain diseases or diversity and conflict between cultures, but the Holocaust wasn't justified by those intentions. It is a noble pursuit to eliminate poverty, but the deaths of 60 million people in the Russian and Chinese revolutions certainly aren't justified by those motives. We look at all these other different things, and regardless of the intentions, evil is something to be opposed. Yet somehow something that we get caught up in this mob mentality that's even being seen in our day today. How do we avoid that? Well, that's what I'd like to discuss here today. 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 13 through 15. Please follow along with me. I'll be citing several verses, mostly in the Gospel of John, but this will be in Paul's second letter to the Corinthian church, which is in modern-day Turkey. And he told them these things in talking about those who were sent out by God. That's what the word apostle means, but are, in fact, lying. Such are false apostles, deceitful workers, transforming themselves into apostles of Christ. So they look like the good guys, but in reality, they're not. And Paul goes on to say, and no wonder, for Satan himself transforms himself into an angel of light. Therefore it is no great thing if his ministers, his servants, also transform themselves into ministers of righteousness. Right meaning in a right relationship with God, good people, whose end will be according to their works. Now that in and of itself answers the question, why don't the bad deeds done in this world ultimately end up catching up with the bad guys? Well, they do in the end. God will let them get away with these things for a while because he wants to give them a second chance. But when it ultimately came down to it, you compare any evil done in the fictional universe of My Little Pony or in our real universe with individuals like Pol Pot, Hitler, Stalin, and all these other individuals. We're talking about what has always been and what will continue to be the case so long as evil exists. Bad guys don't make themselves look like the bad guys. Their specialty is lying. And the most effective lie is one that looks like the truth. Therefore, the only way to spot a lie isn't to know every single kind of lie, but to know the truth. That way you'll be able to spot when that is being misrepresented, twisted, or askewed. Good example that we saw in today's episode with Cozy Glow. How was she exposed and defeated? Looked like a harmless little Pegasus filly. What would you say to that sort of individual who's always got a smile, always doing nice things for every pony? Why would you think that she was the bad guy? Well, just like in Scripture, there are three things that I want to discuss with you all today as far as how we confront evil from a biblical perspective. And not only speaking to my fellow Christians, but sharing with the non, this is what the Bible says should be our approach to evil. And you can form conclusions accordingly. How was Cozy Glow exposed and defeated? We saw it illustrated in today's episode in quite a biblical fashion. One, they didn't assume what they didn't know. They fell back on what they did know. This is, of course, in emphasizing the truth. You can't know the thoughts, intentions, motives of every single individual ever. Therefore, it's always tricky when you want to spot the bad guy, but can't. Or even worse, you think you've spotted the bad guy, but actually haven't. And this, of course, is in a reference to Chancellor Naysayer. Think of it this way. What would have been accomplished if they just accused? Now remember, I emphasized that word. The name Satan, what we call our enemy, the devil, is accuser. And I want to have as least in common with him as possible. But if they just accuse Naysayer of everything wrong ever because of his general bad attitude towards non-ponies, what would have been accomplished? I mean, Equestria would have still lost everything, but at least there would have been one character with a bad attitude you wouldn't have to deal with as everything else is destroyed. Not very productive, is it? And that's why the Bible emphasizes in Ephesians 6:10 through 12, you can look it up on your own time, that our enemies aren't other people. It's the spiritual forces behind them that we as Christians need to focus on. When it ultimately comes down to it, what was the solution we saw in today's episode? Why did Naysayer have trouble trusting non-ponies? We don't know. What fixed that? Beating him up for having a bad opinion of others? No, that would have affirmed his prejudices and probably won more to his cause. Was it instead showing them firsthand that there was a better option? Perhaps. Yona could have charged his chair and we would have laughed, but instead she unlocked his chains and changed his heart instead. And as the former president of the United States, Abraham Lincoln, once said, "If I take my enemy and make him my friend, have I not defeated my enemy?" He was a Christian, and he was basing that belief on his belief in the Bible as well. First thing, they didn't assume what they didn't know. They fell back on what they did. They didn't make accusations as to who was the bad guy. They found out who was and who wasn't on their side. And in the end, all was exposed. And that's what brings us to the second point. They didn't confront the darkness. They exposed it to the light. Cozy Glow, manipulative and malevolent as she was, the moment she was exposed to her crowds of slaves and peons and so forth, all of her power over them was entirely taken away. So let me ask you this, just simply straightforward input. What's more effective, matching your power against someone else's, the Young Six versus the rest of Friendship Academy, or taking power away from your enemy entirely? I'd rather fight an easier opponent than a longer battle. That's just me. And then third, they didn't match the enemy's heart. I'll clarify that in a moment. They didn't match the enemy's heart. They showed God's. Cozy Glow may have been able to use friendship, but she never understood love. Like so many people in our world today, she thought that love was just a way to get what she wanted. For her, it was power. For others, it's something from things as shallow as sex to something as actually relevant to the human psyche as just alleviating loneliness. But when we're talking about relationships, just look at today's episode. What got the Tree of Harmony involved? Was it gathering a mob through lying and doing nice things with ulterior motives? Or being willing to jump into a magic vacuum, potentially losing your life, to save your friends? Which one sounds more like God? Well, let's look at our example. In the Bible, ask ourselves once again with these 3 points, how will Satan be defeated? In light of the first point, not assuming what you don't know, but falling back on what you do, how do you spot a lie? You know the truth. Not by knowing all the ways that someone can lie, but falling back on what is actually true. It's simply this. If you know Jesus' voice, you'll spot fakes of him. I could go into a number of examples where Jesus describes himself as the good shepherd and the sheep hear his voice and follow him, but I want to keep the contrast between him and Satan the focus in today's study. So John chapter 8 verse 42 is what I'm going to read. Speaking to a group of people who wouldn't believe what he had to say even if they saw him in full heavenly glory, Jesus said to them, "If God were your father," they claimed that they were on God's side and Jesus was a minister of Satan. "If God were your father, you would love me." Just a thought. If you loved God, you're talking to him, dude. "For I proceeded forth and came from God. Nor have I come of myself, but he sent me. Why do you not understand my speech?" I'm telling you the truth, right? "Because you are not able to listen to my word. You are of your father," not God, but the devil, "and the desires of your father you want to do." So he's essentially making a contrast. He's saying, look, if you reflected God's heart, you'd recognize it as you're talking to it. But because you're reflecting another heart, the devil's heart, that's being shown in your life. How? "He was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he speaks a lie, he speaks from his own resources, for he is a liar and the father of it." Someone who's literally spiritual father, the foundation for what they decide right and wrong as, do you think they're going to be able to understand the truth when everything they decide what truth is based on is a liar? Now, let me simplify that. If your God is a liar, how do you know when someone's telling the truth? The source of right and wrong for you, if he is a liar, what is the truth? Everything's a lie, right? Because the definition of good in your mind is a liar. Because if you haven't chosen God, you haven't chosen neutrality, you've chosen something else. More on that in a moment as well. But recognize the point that Jesus is making here. They were trying to kill him because he was saying things that they didn't like. As we can see in our day today, nothing has changed. But look at this. Jesus makes the comparison between him and Satan. "I'm here to tell you the truth, but you can't understand what I'm saying." Why? Because the one you learned languages from is a liar. And you're not going to recognize the truth if your God is a liar. But secondly, going into, rather than confronting the darkness, exposing it into the light, let's make this contrast again. How is Satan going to be defeated? Not by uniting all of humanity against him. He's a very powerful angel. And we're not going to be able to stand up to that kind of creature with this physical means. Everything that we have is physical. He's spiritual. He could care less and do far more than we think we're capable of. But think about this as well. Given all that he has the potential to do, why does he think that lying is his most effective tool? That should say something. How do we defeat Satan then, if nothing physical is going to affect him? Because it's not going to be through uniting humanity, but individually turning to God. Because think about that. What was the second point again? They didn't confront the darkness with Cozy Glow, right? They exposed her to the light, and her power vanished. I emphasize that Lucifer isn't the dark god, right? He isn't the equal and opposite of God, not even close. He's a created being, an angel of great power, a lot compared to us, but nothing compared to him. And when we're talking about God, the creator, the source of everything good and perfect, the all-powerful being, if you're the all-powerful being and you compare it to anything with some power, but not all of it, you've got infinity above them. So think about that. We're talking about a being that the moment he has to confront God in combat terms, the battle's over. In the same way, there isn't darkness in this room fighting this light. As long as the light is here, the darkness is lost. The only darkness that can exist is the stuff that's like hiding behind other stuff. You see the point? So look at the point that Jesus himself makes. Once again, contrasting his nature with Satan's. John chapter 10, verse 10. The thief does not come except to steal, kill, and destroy. That's his nature. That's all he is capable of doing and all he wants to do. But I have come, Jesus speaking, that they may have life and may have it more abundantly. And that brings us to our third point. They didn't match the enemy's heart. They showed God's, right? How do we defeat Satan? Not by taking his life from him. That's his tactic. But choosing instead the God that gave his life for us. John chapter 15, verse 13 says, Greater love has no one than this, that a man should lay down his life for his friends. Jesus was speaking that, by the way, on the night before he would be arrested and crucified, and do exactly that for them, and for me, and for you. Understand that everything Satan does is a counterfeit. He doesn't create anything on his own. God is truth, so Satan twists it into lies. God is light, so Satan does his best work in secret places and in darkness. God is love, and that is something that he and Cozy Glow could never understand. But it is something we can know personally by looking at God and comparing him to anything else that claims to be of him. God had all power, yet voluntarily became a weak man. God had heaven, yet voluntarily came to this fallen and broken earth to suffer with us. God is perfect, yet he chose to die to save fallen and imperfect people like me. You know that, and Cozy Glow's favors won't be able to manipulate you like she wants them to. Thank you for your time and listening to this study. If you have any sincere questions, ask them. If you'd like to encourage the ministry, do so. But most importantly, if you know someone who would benefit from hearing this message, share it with them yourself. Or I can take that opportunity on. You can share this video with them. But whatever you choose to do, I just want to thank you personally for taking the time to hear this study. Remember that Jesus loves you, and he has more to offer you than half-hearted favors, ultimately with the motive of manipulating you to getting what he wants out of you. All he's ever wanted is you, and everything that we call good comes from him, and he offers himself freely to you. Everything that we see as good in this show, it calls us back to this source. And if you want to know that source, he isn't eliminating competition. It's the only reason Satan still exists. When his time has come, everyone will have been given the chance to accept or reject that relationship. But the offer is still available for you today. Consider your options. A God who gave his life for you, or an angel that wants you to give up your life for him.